Saddle up your horses.
Pitter patter, let's get at her. It is another episode of the Manely Broncos Podcast. The Broncos are 0-2 in preseason, but that's okay. We have a great show lined up for you here tonight because you know why? Because one of our favorite guests, that's right, one of our favorite guests and one of our favorite podcasts, Let's Talk Broncos, Frankie Abbott, Frankie's Film, joins the Manly Broncos Podcast. It's been a bit, Frankie.
Oh my God!
Oh yeah. You know, we've had to delay it a little bit, but you know, we've made it. We've made it. You know, we're ready. We're here. We're through 2/3 of the preseason now, I guess. And I mean, yeah. Thanks for having me back on, boys.
Did they say it's preseason for the players? It's preseason for us. We're still kind of working on the kinks of
exactly
getting
right.
Getting ready for the regular season. So, Frankie, how you doing, my man?
Doing great. Doing great. Excited to be on.
All right.
Yeah. Cameron, you missed the perfect opportunity to say that we're Owen Wilson.
No.
You done messed up. Welcome back, Frankie.
Is there like an inside thing about Owen Wilson, or just because of Russell Wilson?
No, he said because we're 0-2. He said we're 0-2.
Okay.
Russ is our quarterback. Yeah, so you had a perfect opportunity to say we're Owen Wilson.
All right.
I mean,
my boss at work just had a kid, so all the dad jokes are coming your way.
That's
hey, I'm here for all of them. That was glorious.
That landed, honestly. Like I'm. Good
start. Right. I was gonna say, like, if it was if they lose their third preseason game and Russell Wilson with it being 0-3, then there's obviously that.
Then we're Owen Wilson.
That's right. But so it was definitely. Let's just kind of jump into it a little bit. Right? So the Broncos played they played the San Francisco 49ers in what should we say a better field than the Arizona Cardinals field. It was Levi Stadium has been known for being a rather terrible field, but it was better than the Arizona Cardinals field by a mile, which should kind of tell you in and of itself about how bad that the Cardinals field was, or why the Broncos maybe should never have played that preseason game to begin with. That's another story. But Frankie, we'll start with you as our guest. What was maybe your number one takeaway from that preseason?
Number one takeaway? I don't know. I think the offense and Russell Wilson continue to look pretty good. I was excited to see Russ, he looked confident taking off and running. He looked a little bit faster with the ball in his hands. He seemed a little bit more decisive, I'd say, making decisions when it came to just time to tuck in and run when he was facing, zero blitzes and, he had an open lane to be able to go get himself a first down. He wanted to go out and do that. So I thought that looked a lot better. Starting offensive line looked a lot better. We'd still like to see some better hands from Ben Powers with how big of a contract he got given out, but they look good run blocking. Excited to see what Mike McGlinchey looks like this week. Outside of that, I think some of the depth pieces look pretty exciting, but those are probably my biggest takeaways from what we're going to see out of the actual team this season.
What about you, Brandon? What was one of your big takeaways or biggest takeaway from that game? You're muted, Brandon.
I keep doing this. I had two specifically that I wanted to mention. First of all, the DJ Jones revenge game, man. He was absolutely manhandling their entire interior, and he got, I think, at least one holding call, and there probably should have been more than one. Honestly, he was just they could not handle him. He was wrecking that interior, which was amazing to see. And then Damari Mathis just continues to look like a really good number 2 cornerback, which is exactly what we need. We can't afford to have him not take a big step forward in his second year in the NFL and kind of solidify himself as that. I mean, obviously PS2 is your number 1 quarterback. PS2 is the number 1 quarterback in the NFL. Fight me, I will die on this hill. But Damari Mathis has a good opportunity and has been making the most of it so far to be that, number 2, at least outside corner. And this secondary, it could be special. But he had that really nice pass breakup against, Ronnie Bell, which was nice to see. because the only other thing I did want to mention, as long as we're talking about kind of the secondary, is on that first drive, though. I mean, we settled into kind of a nicer defensive flow game plan, if you will. But on that first drive, it just kind of felt like the Niners did whatever they wanted between the 20s, and then they kind of we tightened it up in the red zone. But that was somewhat concerning, but then we kind of pulled it out. So nice effort on the defensive side, just overall.
Bend but not break defense, almost, right? I mean,
the third stringers went out there, the future DoorDash drivers, and then everyone's talking about, should we be worried about Vance Joseph? Like, come on, that's just stupid.
Right.
No,
Matty,
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, Matty, what about you?
It was for me. It's the story of the JJs. Jalil and Javonte in the backfield. How great is it to have 33 back? You could tell he needs some reps and all that, and that's what preseason's for and whatnot. What a freak. Like, I was expecting after it happened for us to not even see him this season. And now, like, he's here. He's back. Maybe look the ball all the way in when you got a little screen pass set up for you and you got blockers in front. But, like, we can work with that. Lots of touches for him. And Jaleel McLaughlin, MCG, if we want to put that on it, like, he deserves all the letters, even if they don't belong there. Like, the guy is a legit NFL player, and all of the people that are hungry for us to trade for a certain running back from Indianapolis,
my God, no.
we may not need him. Now, I want 38 is kind of whack. I would like 23 for him, but yeah, man, that guy is a stud. He deserves a place on our 53.
So two questions here, one of them more serious than the other. At this point, do you think Jaleel has? I mean, obviously, he's probably going to play in the last game against the Rams, right? But do you think at this point he's maybe done enough to take that RB3 spot ahead of Beatty?
Oh, I will say that McLaughlin has for sure locked his roster spot.
It's a little bit of a rhetorical question, but I know going into the game, especially in the last few days of camp, there was a bit more buzz about, and it might have been, again, the whole thing might have been more of a earn it test, if you will, of, Beatty was getting more reps, Beatty was getting more praise. There were people legitimately saying, like, don't forget about Tyler Beatty. But between that and, them spelling his name wrong, it might have just been like, come out here and earn it. So no, I completely agree. I just was curious what you guys thought. The second less pressing or more pressing, depending on how you view it, question. So Cam, I know you've multiple times called him Jaleel McFly or McFlyin, I think maybe.
Jaleel McFlyin.
Jaleel McFlyin. Is that the better nickname, or Jaleel McLaughlin because he's laughing all the way to the bank on every carry?
I don't think any of these are great.
I'm totally kidding. I warned you about the dad jokes, man. I told you about it 5 minutes ago. You can't be surprised.
You're just whipping gutter balls. Like, I'm loving it.
That's what dad jokes are, man. That's the whole point. I'm totally kidding. But no, he had a great game.
What I want to see, I need to see this because the internet is incredible sometimes. Do you know how, like, the late night commercials with, like, the adopt a pet, your $1.73 or whatever can adopt so many pets? And they played Sarah McLaughlin in the background in the eyes of the angel, right? Like, I need that. I need that clipped to him just making defenders look stupid, and just cut it all together to that song. I that's got to happen at some point in his career, because the way that dude puts people on skates, like that, it's got to happen.
Well, especially seeing him, because he had a rushing and a receiving touchdown, which was just incredible. But I'm kind of it just of note, not that we didn't do it last year, but we seemed to be targeting backs out of the backfield a lot more, especially on, like, literally the very first play, which Javonte, you got to catch that. Like, that was, if he caught that could have been a touchdown. Like, I couldn't see the kind of third level, but that was at least probably 20 yards.
Yeah.
That was insane. But yeah, it was a great running game.
One more point about Jaleel I wanted to make too is, I mean, he's making impacts on the special teams too. He had the muffed kick on the one that was like only to the 8, and he tried to run out and make a play on where like you don't want to see that, but it's also kind of like, I don't know, it seemed like more he was trying to make a play than something he'd probably do in the regular season. But then he did end up having like the 44-yard return. He's showing really good vision. I mean, he's just like he's better between the tackles than I really expected. I mean, his ability to not get knocked back whenever he's meeting defenders, like he's a solid back. He's a good runner. He's been able to run through some arm tackles. And I mean, like Matty was saying, I mean, he makes defenders make some silly decisions sometimes. And it's awesome to see. He's a fun player. And I mean, you don't really need him to be able to do any of the like pass protecting stuff because you have Samaje Perine, who's also looked really good this preseason. Mm-hmm. But on top of that is just like probably a top 5 pass protection back in the league. Like he's so good at that aspect of the game that like, it really the sky's the limit. I think for him just being able to be that perfect little role player and in a Sean Payton offense, I think Jaleel McLaughlin could do some really fun stuff this year. And I think he offers like in that role as a gadget player, he offers you a higher ceiling than Tyler Beatty does.
Yeah, well, I think he also gives you that. I mean, again, I love Samaje. I made that known. Obviously, we love Javonte. They're also very similar backs. Like they do, not that they do the same thing, but they're just both the big bruisers. And you kind of like, you can't have a third big bruiser. I mean, you can, but it just doesn't give you as much variability or flexibility as someone like Jaleel does. So, I mean, again, I super for it.
One of the things,
real quick before, because I feel like Cam might just be about to steal this, but I'm just kidding. No, but I mean, every year you have the undrafted free agent, right? That shows out, makes the roster, seems to be. And he's that guy.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that I think is so unique about him, and I mean, Sean Payton even said it best in the early on before the preseason, is that like, he's one of those backs, like the difference between Tyler Beatty and the difference between Tyler McLaughlin. It wasn't really like a knock on Beatty.
Hold on, did you just call him Tyler McLaughlin?
No, I said the difference.
Respect. I'm just messing with you.
The difference between McLaughlin and Beatty was just that like McLaughlin can hit the tiniest of holes, right? Like, and like he can hit that and run like as like a home run hitter. Beatty like is one of those players that, you can get him in that open space, and he's a very elusive back in that open space. McLaughlin feels like he can do both. And I think that that's the exciting thing about it. And I think that, so often I actually was talking about this on the PSF app just like today, actually. And I think that Marvin Mims, so much we were talking about how he's possibly a Tyler Lockett type player and how Lockett was one of Russ's favorite wide receivers in Seattle, right? I think also, too, I think having McLaughlin in certain packages, like, for instance, Frankie, you mentioned about how good of a pass protector Perine is, but having, like, actual set plays for a guy like McLaughlin out of the backfield, I think would really do a lot of damage. So, I mean, like, and I'm not trying to compare it to a certain extent like an Alvin Kamara or a Darren Sproles in a certain way, like when he was with Sean Payton, but it's like that creativity to allow McLaughlin to get him out in space and utilize your best players or your best athletes like that, I feel like is a really good strong suit to use, especially for a young player like, a McLaughlin early on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just something with the Broncos and players that came from Mizzou. Just I don't know what it is, but there's got to be something there. Unfortunately,
you mentioned someone too who I want to touch on is Marvin Mims, who like Marvin Mims I think is going to end up being okay, but I am a little bit concerned about that hamstring injury and how much that's kind of seeming like to linger a little bit. He hasn't seemed to gotten the run in preseason that I think we were expecting. And that when I was going back and looking at the tape, there was one. It was like a comeback route where like he's just like I watched a lot of Marvin Mims coming out. I mean, there's a lot of tape of him running deep at Oklahoma, and I mean, he just doesn't seem to have that same explosiveness right now. So I hope he's able to kind of return to that full form at some point, because I'm just it's a little bit of a bummer right now that I feel like he's kind of without Tim Patrick, he's a little bit of I'd say that X factor in the receiver room. I think we can kind of count on what Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are going to do, even though I think a lot of us are expecting Jeudy to take a step forward. But I think Marvin is truly that X factor for what can be either the difference between like a couple 100-yard receiver, kind of what KJ's kind of been when he's been healthy, or like a 700-yard receiver who ends up scoring like 5-6 touchdowns. And then we're like, oh man, we've really got someone we're cooking with gas with. So that's someone who I kind of wanted to touch on too from the San Francisco game, that I hope he's kind of getting the opportunity to kind of recover. Because
Wow.
what sucks about a hamstring is just one of those things that he's not going to get the chance to
We saw
really
with KJ.
fully recover
We've
from
seen
it.
it with KJ.
It's just one of those injuries that it just lingers, unfortunately. And speaking of, I mean, God, I feel so bad for the wide receiver room in general, man. Jalen Virgil,
God, man.
God, why? Just come on.
Which by the
he had that. Which should that have been a touchdown?
Yes.
It's arguable that it should have been, but I feel so bad for him. Dude was killing it, and honestly, I think he has shown more now than we've seen from Brandon Johnson. And I still like Brandon Johnson, not just because his name is Brandon, but and it'll be fun to see. I'm excited to be able to see more of him. Yeah, I'm excited to be able to see more of him now moving forward because unfortunately he does have the opportunity to. But just this wide receiver room is like so talented and also so cursed at the same time, and you hate to see it.
Agree. I mean, if you were to talk about a disappointment in that game, we have to point it at Kendall Hinton. I'm sorry. Like Kendall Hinton was a disappointment in that preseason game. You had a drop. Now he did have a key block in the McLaughlin touchdown run, but I mean he was not great, and especially for a player where the Broncos actually added. This was before the KJ Hamler release, and everything. But I mean, he was sort of already in the what are we going to do with him phase. When they added guys like Little Jordan Humphrey, Marquez Callaway, and Marvin Mims just in this off season alone. So he was sort of like already out on that, like outside looking in along the lines of Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil. And so to see the unfortunate, turn with Hinton is frustrating because especially we're talking about a wide receiver that actually got better as like the season was progressing, the moment he left being a quarterback and started progressing as a wide receiver. So like, it's really frustrating. And I don't know if he even makes the roster right now. Like, I really don't know if he makes the roster.
Well, does he make,
go ahead. You go. He's not the hardest guy, I think, to sneak through on a practice squad if they're that interested in keeping him around. I mean, that's happened like the past 3 years, I feel like, as I'm like, oh, man, they cut Kendall Hinton, and then no one picks him up, and then he ends up right back on the Broncos, and then he ends up playing a ton of snaps, to be honest. So, like, no, I completely agree, though. He has been disappointing. But I guess that's always the interesting thing is kind of juggling that, like, what are the other teams? Is someone else going to be really interested in this guy and really try to steal him away? Like, that's always such an interesting thing to look into. And especially for a guy like Kendall, I don't know if other teams will have that much interest in his skill set.
Well, what I was going to say is I think he might be more likely one of those guys that you see released to make room for another wide receiver that we bring in when more camp cuts happen. Because we probably can't do wrong by adding to that room, but you can't just keep someone in that room who hasn't, like, especially with what's been going on with like injuries, you can't just have someone there that maybe, okay, yes, they have the promise, they have the upside. You can't just keep a complete unknown that doesn't, take that next step just because, he might, right? If that makes sense. The other thing that's interesting to me is like, and this might just be, I'm sure it's probably just rest as a veteran, but we really haven't seen Marquez Callaway. Did he get injured and I just didn't see it? Or
no idea.
It might just be not playing and resting, which is interesting because you see something like that, but then you also see, Frank Clark and Randy Gregory playing into the fourth quarter of a preseason game. So I would love to see the thought process that's going on in Coach Payton's head about that. But
Matty, what about you? Was there anything else that kind of stood out for you?
I mean, the Virgil thing breaks my heart because it looked like he could be a guy who was going to contribute a lot for us. I certainly agree. And there's nobody on this video right now, on this pod, who is a bigger Marvin Mims fan than me. And I'm just waiting to see the arrival. It's definitely got to be the hammy that's holding him back. I know what it looks like for him to take over a game, and he's just non-existent. And that's just, it's very, very odd to see a guy who set state records in the high school football in the state of Texas, which is kind of a big deal, all over the place, and crushing it at Oklahoma. So now he's doing, kind of nothing, and he's an afterthought. Really, the only reason why he's being mentioned right now is because of where he was drafted in the draft, the capital used on him.
It's even more interesting because you've seen, sorry to cut you off, you've seen a lot recently of rookie wide receivers coming into the league and doing things right away as rookies, where that used to not really be a thing. Like wide receiver was like one of those positions that, not to the extent of tight end, but like you don't usually see them do something until at least their second year. You still see the second year jump, but you've seen a lot more of the young guys coming in and blowing up as a rookie. Yeah. So
I'd say it's almost more often than not at this point.
Yeah, at this point,
when you talk about those, this is rarer guys or those top 75 guys. Yeah,
it's kind of nuts, but
well, and especially when, sorry, not to cut you off, but especially when you factor in the fact that they traded up for Marvin Mims. This was a guy that they went to go get. And again, like, I commented on this in draft night, and we've kind of seen it throughout the preseason. And like, you don't want to way too early, say these things, but like, for anyone who's paying attention in the preseason, we're seeing guys like Cedric Tillman and guys like Jalen Hyatt and guys like Tank Dell who are producing in the preseason.
Oh my God, Tank Dell, man.
So far. And these were guys that were on Denver's board, and they all went in the third round when Denver wouldn't have had to move up to get these guys. The same thing with the corners. You talk about Riley Moss right now. Darius Rush is a guy who's been tearing it up for the Colts and is probably going to be their CB2 to start the year. He's a guy that was available way later, but they wanted to take, a guy like Riley Moss. So it's just decisions like that where it's just kind of like, it'll be interesting to see how these kind of age throughout the season, because this is a team that is playing really, like, they have very defined margins with the Russ contract, with everything they have right now. And they're not, it'll be interesting to see how they manage those margins, because right now I don't think they're necessarily doing the best job.
Trey Palmer's another one. Trey Palmer was another one too within the
and he's looked great in preseason too.
The guy who beat supposed cornerback one by some people's standards.
Sauce Gardner.
So, no, it's PS2. Anyways,
that's why I said it in air quotes.
A place that was considered a strength for us, the last couple of seasons, at least on paper, was wide receiver. This year, Vance Joseph has said that the edge position or room is perhaps the most talented 1 through 6 that he's had. And I would like to highlight.
Say what I'm about to say.
I would like to highlight Agent Zero.
You're going to do it. I knew you were going to do it. That was my next thing I wanted to mention. All right, go for it.
The guy has been incredible. And honestly, he may be the biggest factor on our defense when we look back at this season, for kind of like him kind of coming out of nowhere. Some of the, we kind of joked about it, talking about Randy G and before the podcast started. We'll get to the other guy who deserves his flowers later, but like Randy Gregory not always being available. If Cooper comes out and balls out and can stay healthy, like, we may be really doing some fun stuff defensively, and we might actually be able to get at some of those quarterbacks in our division that, have been problems for us. So he's going to be a big time factor for us moving forward. Yeah,
he's absolutely been tearing it up. And Frankie, I was going to say, Frankie, it may have been you or it may have been Joey with Let's Talk Broncos, but I thought that, like, his comparison or your comparison when he brought it up, I thought was, I was a little unsure of it maybe like at that time, but like when you actually see it unfold, it's like when you or Joey called him like the Tim Patrick of that edge room, like it almost, it's starting to ring true a little bit, because you are really starting to see the player that you saw actually coming out of college, the guy that was actually surprising he fell as far as he did. A player that he was far more consistent with his pass rush moves that with Nick Bonito. Oh, by the way, he's having a great preseason as well. That's another huge takeaway as well. But I think one of the reasons why, and this is sort of alluding to your frustrations of, Frank Clark or Randy Gregory playing into the fourth quarter, but, and I'll leave this to you, Frankie, but it's like, it's one of the reasons why, Sean Payton may not have alluded to the fact that Frank Clark and Jonathan Cooper are in a competition for one another, but it's one of the reasons why you're starting to see some rumblings and some rumors out there of possibly Cooper playing alongside Gregory and not Frank Clark playing alongside Gregory. So what was just did you get that sense when you were watching kind of like that with Frank Clark, Frankie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'd say that they're necessarily competing. I guess I could see if Frank Clark doesn't make the team, but I also feel like we haven't seen Frank Clark given too much opportunity. And I feel like when I've watched him, I've seen him get to do some specific things that I feel like they're very specific to what he's doing. Like him and Zach Allen got to run a fun twist where he really collapsed inside on the guard hard. And I was like, man, that seems like something that specifically drew up for Frank Clark. I think Frank Clark's safe to make this team. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, a big thing I wanted to touch on is when you talk about Jonathan Cooper, when you talk about him falling in the draft, I've always said, and I've said this since the time he was drafted, I'm probably not the main, but I'm probably one of the anti-George Payton, not the biggest George Payton fan, guys. I wouldn't say anti-George Payton, but Jonathan Cooper is probably George Payton's best. People are going to think this is a weird statement. Best draft pick. People are going to be like, oh, Patrick Surtain. Yes, Patrick Surtain is the best player he's drafted, but Patrick Surtain was a blue chip player in that draft that ended up going, number 9 overall.
You would expect it. You would expect him to play.
Kind of expect that. Whereas Jonathan Cooper being a player that fell where he
did,
being able to get put into a right situation, right? Like that was such a great pick and has really aged well. It's kind of we're at that point where we can say like, oh, how have these picks aged? He's one of them that has definitely aged super well. I'd say Quinn is definitely up there as well too. But he's gotten to play in such a good position and age so well that I think like you said, I mean, he's really one of the most underrated but consistent players, and is probably going to be in this defensive room this year, and especially in an edge room that is so many question marks when you talk about the health.
What I was gonna say that Cam started to steal yet again because of just what happens, right? Is it's interesting because I mean, you look at Randy Gregory's contract, and he's pretty much locked in for the foreseeable future. We have him through 2026. And there's really, I mean, I think there's a potential out after next year, maybe, where we're not totally screwed. But where I'm kind of going with this is, and yes, thank you, Clayton, smash that like button. Is I feel like we can't do, the one thing that I cannot have happen here, and I will lose my shit. We can't have Jonathan Cooper turn into Shaq Barrett. And what I mean by that is not the he doesn't turn into an amazing pass rusher, because we've already seen that happen. It's happening before our eyes. We have to give him his shot. I don't even care. I love Randy Gregory, but if Randy Gregory can't stay on the field, and I hate to say this, but if he can't stay on the field or he struggles this year, I would not be surprised. I don't know if we cut him, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jonathan Cooper push from, I don't know if I'd say maybe not a starting role, but maybe just a lot more snaps. We might see a lot of Jonathan Cooper, and they'll figure out ways to get him on the field, because you have to find ways to get your best pass rushers on the field. But if he continues down this path, and I mean, if Randy Gregory also shows out, embarrassment of riches, we have so much pass rush depth and it's amazing, but I can't see my boy Jonathan Cooper go down that road that we went down with Shaq Barrett, because I will be so pissed. But he has an opportunity to cement himself, I think, honestly, as a starter. Maybe not this year, but again, if we keep going, and even if we lose a lot of money in the deal, I wouldn't be surprised if he takes some roster spots in the future if this keeps happening. I know this is way early, but
yeah, for sure. And obviously, moving a little bit more into the defensive line, Frankie, one of the other players that has been a huge standout is one of your gold stars and one of your boys of this preseason, and that would be Elijah Garcia, who
Elijah's been eating.
Yeah. What have you been seeing from Mr. Garcia, aside from that very athletic interception that he made, obviously in this preseason against the 49ers?
I mean, the interior defensive line for Denver doesn't have a lot of guys outside of Zach Allen and DJ Jones that can really win one-on-one in terms of a pass rush situation. They just don't have a lot of those guys, and he's one of the few guys that can do that. So, I mean, I think he has a really good chance of making this roster on that fact alone. I haven't seen as much growth out of Matt Henningsen as I think we all want to see. Obviously, we all know what happened to Awazurike, who's, probably still betting on Broncos games. Like they just don't really have a lot of these bodies. I like Tyler Lancaster as like their backup nose behind.
He's been getting
Mike
some
Purcell.
starts.
He's a very solid run defender. And I mean, it's funny. Like, again, he was a guy when I didn't even realize Ryan Edwards is actually like, I think Lancaster's going to make the team. And I looked at him. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm in Wisconsin. So like, I was like, oh my God, it's Tyler Lancaster, who he played a lot of snaps for the Packers and was actually like a decent rotational run defender who made some really boneheaded mistakes for them and kind of cost them a playoff win, which is pretty funny. But he's a solid rotational piece. So like, I don't mind having him in the building if they really think they need more run pluggers. But one thing I'll say is and this kind of affects the Jonathan Cooper role as well, is when you have Vance Joseph, who I think is going to be able to utilize more pass rushers, more of these pass rush weapons, with the fact that he comes from that Wade Phillips tree of we are going to throw a billion bodies at your quarterback and hope you can deal with it. And I think that kind of it doesn't hurt having, a 3 through 6 of pass rushers that can kind of handle their business. But geez, what else was I going to say? But just the fact that they have a lot of these bodies, I think when you talk about Mike Purcell, Josie Jewell, when you talk about Alex Singleton, a lot of these bodies I think that are really designed to be best going forward. Tyler Lancaster as well, who I just mentioned, they're best at run defending. They're best at going straight forward, plugging a gap, and just shutting down their assignment. They're very good at that. They're not the best going backward, and they're not the best playing in space, but they can handle their role in the run game. And a big thing that's Vance Joseph throughout the years has always been Vance Joseph being able to orchestrate a good pass defense. I'm not too worried about. He might have some games where he gives up some big, a lot of touchdowns. Maybe it's to Mahomes this year because he's sending too much pressure. But I think the pass defense will do well because he has the tools. The run defense is where he's always had issues. But then I look at the roster, I'm like, man, they have 5 or 6 guys that I think are actual dudes when it comes to playing run defense. So it's a good combination. And I think a fun one that actually works out pretty well.
The one that we should probably tie a bow on, of course, is the other quarterback position, which I'm sure everybody wants to talk about, and that would be Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci. And so obviously there was a case where DiNucci did play better. DiNucci did play better than Stidham in the first preseason game. Even off of the eye test, he looked better. But, they gave Stidham all that money, and, you did see a few overreactions start to come off of that first preseason game saying that, DiNucci should be the quarterback too, or that, that they should really think about moving on from Stidham. And I think that once you saw that second preseason game, there's a fair argument to be made that DiNucci was the worst player on the field that day. He was horrendous against the 49ers. And Stidham, while he wasn't exactly great either, I mean, I think the stats will tell you he had a great game, but he was pretty up and down, it seemed like to me. But what was your guys' Brandon, Matty, and Frank, what was your guys' initial takeaways from that? Because it really felt like none of them were moving the needle at all.
You know who might move the needle? A guy we talked about last week and a guy that we just played against.
Really?
Who was just demoted to QB3 and is certainly on the trade block. So should we trade for Lance? I
would love to.
I don't think the compensation. I don't think the compensation is going to be that large. I don't think it will even be a day. I don't think it would be even a day 2 pick at this point.
I'd give him a guy 4.
A 4, maybe a 4, and you get back him in a 7 or something, just because Peyton loves to have draft picks. So something like that. It's a long season. I certainly think that the skill sets translate between what we're seeing out of Russell Wilson and what Trey Lance could provide us on the ground even.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot better than trading for Jonathan Taylor. Sign me up for
that's
Trey Lance.
That's not even a conversation in my opinion.
So let me ask, when people
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I've been seeing the Trey Lance. I'm very interested because I I'm not the biggest fan of the Trey Lance move. I don't, at least right now. If we get to midway through the season or after the year and Russell Wilson completely, like, we're completely out on Russ, I'm completely down. I think right now, though, like, I don't see it. If they go after the season and they say we can try to make him a reclamation project, I think I'm a bit more about it. But as it stands right now, like, I don't see much benefit. Like, Trey Lance needs to go to a situation where at least, like, he gets live reps. He gets the opportunity to play around that. I think so much of what we saw last season was such so much of what caused last season. I mean, obviously there were a lot of factors, the Nathaniel Hackett probably being the biggest one. But one of the things I think have impacted Russell Wilson throughout the season was his confidence in himself and, like, his ability to go out and make plays. And I think adding a quarterback like Trey Lance, I don't think helps a situation like that. Personally, and this is a complete personal thing because I don't think this matters much to Sean Payton in the locker room, I'm not trying to hear let's put in Trey Lance every time Russell Wilson, like, has a bad game or something like that, crazy things like that. Like, while I think it would be a fun idea, I don't think it's the time, because I think Trey Lance up until this point has not been very good. Like, he had a decent second half against Denver, but he also had some really embarrassing reads. Like, he has not shown enough to me as a quarterback that you can be like, oh man, this can be our safe. He can be a starter for a year and we're fine with it, because he hasn't shown enough that he, like, I'm not saying it's his fault, but, like, he's not beating out guys like Sam Darnold and Brock Purdy in training camp. And that's not me trying to take away from those guys, but I'm just not really hunting to have that guy sitting behind Russ when I don't think that's really going to help anything. If we get to week 7, week 8, the wheels look like they've completely fallen off Russell Wilson, then sign me up completely. So, but as it stands right now, if they're kind of, where I think they'll be in the middle of the season, where I think this can be somewhat of a rebound year for Russ, I don't think he's going to be excellent, but I think it will be a fine rebound year, then I just see no reason for it, because I think Trey Lance needs to be an opportunity where he's getting starts for him to ever actually get anywhere as a quarterback.
Let me run through this pitch again, because I completely agree with you. I don't disagree with you. The only reason I'm more interested in doing it now is because I think he'd be cheaper. I don't want to be the people that are bent over the barrel in the middle of the season with a guy who clearly is. I don't want to be Owen Wilson and he's completely washed and they know it. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to drive the price up because we gave up 3 first-round picks to get this guy. I'm not saying that'll happen. I might be wrong. That might not happen. It might be fine then still. But that's part of the reason is, like, I don't want to give up major assets. My only thought process behind this is, again, I give him maybe a 4th. Yes, it's probably not great. I'm saying this for completely selfish reasons. He needs game reps. I agree with that. He definitely needs game reps. The reason I'm also thinking, okay, get him now. I'm not saying that, okay, put him in every time Russ has a bad game. I know people will say that. That's obviously going to happen. But if we then get to week 9 or whatever, and it's obviously completely gone downhill, everything's imploded, it's completely garbage, you can put him in, give him the game reps he needs for half a season. It doesn't even matter if we win or lose. If he somehow figures it out, great. But I don't even think that he's going to figure it out to a point where you're going to ruin your future draft position. I think he's going to show some growth. You're probably still going to be in the running for a quarterback next year. And then let's say you draft a guy next year in the top of the first round, like we probably still have a good chance to. Then you have 2 very talented players. And at the very least, Trey Lance, if he looks horrible, get rid of him. It doesn't even matter. But if he, like, shows anything, and there's definitely an argument to be made if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. But you have 2 highly talented people at the position that could turn into what you're wanting, and you have an amazing offensive coach in Sean Payton who could turn them into what he wants them to be. And also, I mean, we all know what Sean Payton loves to do with his athletic players that he can move around the field. You put Trey Lance in the Taysom Hill position. I'm kind of kidding. But that's the only reason I would be interested in it now. I'm not trying to pound the table for it, but that's just was my plan. Personally.
It's a reasonable argument. And I mean, like, I completely see that side of it. I guess I'm just, like, I'm so caught between.
But I get what you're saying.
I don't think he's shown enough, and it's hard for me to be like, oh, like, and like you're saying, if they're bad enough, we're like, oh, say they're Owen Wilson, which even if all the wheels fall off, I think Sean Payton will get this team to at least be semi-respectable. Maybe not Owen Wilson, but maybe they'll be two win Wilson, we'll say. But, like, like at that point, I would almost rather them, like, just fully go in on a rookie QB that Sean Payton likes and have that extra, 3rd, 4th round pick to be able to throw at something else. I don't know. Like you say, I think it's just kind of preference. I'm just more like,
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that.
Right. It's tough, but it is interesting to hear because I think a lot of people are very interested in doing it right now. And again, I'm just so like, man, like I think right now, like this is the last season for Russ, I think, to really like showcase his stuff, you know? And I think right now, like it would just be such a like detrimental thing to the locker room and maybe to him, even though he probably doesn't care. And I'm not going to pretend I have any idea of the inner workings in the mind of a quarterback to just bring in another guy with all that drama tied to him right now. I just don't think that's the move. And I don't think Sean Payton wants that. He said how much he doesn't want this team to be a media circus, even though he instantly went, around and threw a bunch of fireballs at the New York Jets. But like he said how much he doesn't want that. So I just like, you know what I'm saying? It'd be so weird of him to then turn around before we've even gotten to like really get a good look at Russ in the Sean Payton offense and be like, no, I want to see if we've got another guy. If that did happen though, I would be damn worried about Russ. Like, if they made us trade in like 2 days and it was like Denver sent a 3rd round pick or that could turn into a 2nd for Trey Lance, I'd be like, man, we've probably been getting some bad reports about Russ in camp because he must be sucking.
Yeah. Or that there's an injury that we just don't know about.
Right. Because
like,
I mean, dude, like, and I think about it from like Trey Lance's perspective. Like, I mean, I guess this doesn't much matter to him, but I think about it like, I don't know, like it's just weird. I don't know. It's all very weird.
It's not going to happen. Like, I know it's definitely not going to happen. That's just like what went through my mind. But it makes complete sense what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. I also think, just based on what we've seen so far, I don't think it's going to be that bad. The biggest thing that I just don't want to see happen, and honestly, I think this is more of a risk of this happening than it is of like the wheels completely falling off, because Russ has looked good. He's looked better than last year. I did not expect him to run that much. Like, holy shit. It also was interesting because like some people I know probably looked at it and was like, oh, well, he didn't go through his reads. He just took off and run. He looked up. He went through. He didn't see anything he liked. There was no one open.
That was the correct read.
Some of them there were. Yeah. But he made the right read. He went through the reads and he's like, nope, I can get 20 yards on the ground. I'm going to take off and go for it. And he looked quicker. I didn't expect to see him run that much. I think he's looked pretty good, honestly. My biggest concern is mostly just the blocking in front of him. And the people now that the depth of who he's throwing to. But my biggest concern is more that he gets back some of what he's lost and he's maybe a top 20 guy and he looks a lot better and the offense looks better and Peyton has us humming because he's a great coach and we go barely over 500.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's an improvement. It's an improvement. But I'm more worried about that. And I think that's honestly more likely to happen than we fall flat on our face again.
Yeah.
And it drags us to the middle and we can't get an elite
quarterback
sucks. Prospect.
Is then we're screwed.
Let me reframe it.
That's why I would rather
just a little.
Go ahead. You go. No, you go.
Let me reframe it because it doesn't have to necessarily be an indictment on Russ. And indictment just seems to be the word du jour these days in the media. It doesn't have to be damning for Russ necessarily. But you don't wait until your house is on fire to buy insurance. And I will say this. You asked the question about DiNucci. You asked the question about Stidham. I don't think either one of those is full coverage insurance. I think it's liability only, baby. And we're not getting the full coverage that we would want out of our quarterback too. So if we're not, then what's the upside there in that scenario? Well, I do know with Lance, if we get him in the building and we get him with Peyton and we do it at a low cost, and we have cap space, like we're not up against it, like his contract's not going to kill us right now, right? If we can get him in the building and Chaos gets a vote over a long season, now 17-game season, like there are worse things. Brock Osweiler was able to guide our team to our last Super Bowl win, our last playoff win, which is really... Like he didn't win that game for us, obviously, but we're certainly not in that game without Brock Osweiler and what he provided. I think that Sean Payton could do more with Trey Lance than what he would be able to do with Stidham or DiNucci if it's necessary. And so would you be willing to trade a 4th round pick for that type of upside and potentially say Russ goes down and misses 5 games like what Peyton Manning did, right? wasn't it 5 games? And Osweiler went like 4-1 or something in starts that season. I think Trey Lance could keep us afloat, and then we get Russ back for a home stretch. I see very minimal downside, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything on Russ. I will follow up and say I don't know of a lot of opportunities that Trey Lance is going to be able to immediately get burned.
This is an example, but this isn't the first time that, say, Sean Payne would go after a reclamation project. He went after Jameis Winston.
Famous?
The
30 for 30 guy?
The 30 for 30 guy.
He went after post-LASIK Jameis Winston.
In terms of Trey not being able to get an opportunity right now, I mean, that's a simple, like, not as terrible and awful as it is, that's a simple waiting game for the 49ers. One of the 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL, or probably one of the top 14 quarterbacks that are on a team that thinks they're a playoff team or thinks they're like a contending team. Sadly, one of those quarterbacks is probably going to endure some kind of injury by the trade deadline and be looking for an option. So I don't think Trey Lance is going to be necessarily like not have an option for the entirety of the season until the trade deadline. And the Vikings have already, been a team that's reportedly had some interest. But that would be my only response to that is I think that actually I don't think the Niners are in a rush right now to move Trey Lance. I think right now his value is kind of at as low as it's going to get with the fact that they're saying he's our QB3 behind Sam Darnold and we're willing to trade him. But if he has another decent second half next week or this upcoming week, and then in week 4, God knows who in the NFC with a team that thinks that they can make a playoff push, they end up breaking their leg or something. And they say, you know what? Hey, we are willing to throw a 3rd rounder for Trey Lance when it was a 5th rounder two months ago. I think something like that is probably the most likely way it goes, honestly.
So moving on now to the next game, and actually we'll start first with the important part because the Broncos and the Rams will be holding joint practices. So I will ask you one, is joint practices a good thing? And it is a good thing from this standpoint. You don't have to worry about Aaron Donald swinging helmets in joint practices this week because Aaron Donald is out this week, and actually he's going to be out for the preseason game, when the Broncos play the Rams. But, Frankie, this is something you wanted to touch on as far as joint practices. Are joint practices a good thing?
First of all, joint practices are excellent. At this point, I almost prefer joint practices to actual preseason games. I think that they're such great, I just enjoy getting to see the actual, what the coaches are being able to put players through. I think they get the most out of them. I think they're a good measuring stick for where your team is at. But one thing I was going to say is I hate the whole what team won it, because I know obviously you'll have teams that are kind of more impressive on the day, but just such a big thing about these games, I guess, in comparison to actual preseason games is there's literally no score. These coaches are here to either work on specific things, to install specific things they think they need to spend more time on. We're getting close to the time when cuts are happening. A lot of the time they're getting better looks at some of these guys in different positions or different opportunities, So while yes, the Rams probably won, however many more one-on-ones or whatever, I just think it's so silly when I see people being like, oh man, Denver lost their joint practice today. Whatever are they going to do? It's guys, that doesn't really measure anything. I think we all remember last year when Denver kicked the crap out of the Cowboys in their joint practice. And, we were all hyped. I had to remember who it was because I thought
Hamler and Judy were going off.
Draymond Jones is holding finger guns up to Josh Ball's head, and we're hearing all these amazing things. But then the season starts, and man, Denver's one of the worst teams in the league, and the Cowboys look like they usually look. It's the point isn't to be the winner at joint practice. The point is to improve the most at joint practice. So if from before joint practice to the end of these, the Denver Broncos improve more than the Rams, that's how they win. It's not, Quinn Miners beat so-and-so in more one-on-one, so the Broncos automatically win today. That's not how we're going to measure this thing. Let's chill out a little bit. Obviously there's going to be a team that might have done better on the day, but let's not read too much into these wins and losses, because the true wins and losses start in a couple weeks, and the team needs to get as ready as they can. So in all honesty, you kind of not you want to be losing, but you kind of want to identify the things the team needs to get better at now. Because once the season starts and you start identifying the things the team needs to get better at, well, now the other team has tape on you and they know your weaknesses and they're attacking them. Right. So it's not the end of the world to have Sean Payton recognized some things the team needs to spend some extra time on 2 weeks before the season starts up. So that was my little rant on joint practices.
That is Frankie's monologue.
The whole win or lose practice thing. We talk about practice. Really? Really? You think that matters in the slightest? Like, come on.
We talk not a game.
Not the game. We're talking about practice. It's so stupid that people like care about that. But I think honestly, I don't think there's a single downside to joint practices at all. Nope. Honestly, like I agree with Frankie. I think they're better than normal practices. You're more competitive. You go against your guys every day. You see your guys all the time. You go against another team. It's like, yeah, I want to show out. I want to show what I can do. It's more. There's more fire. I mean, like, I know one of the things too we'll talk about is like the fights that happen in joint practices seem to happen more in joint practices. It's football. It's going to happen. It's a physical game. I would rather there be, it's going to sound weird saying this, I'd rather there be fights than there be no fights. Like, if there's fights, that's just showing me, again, there's the fire and the competitiveness and the drive to get better. Right. And only good things can come out of that. Like, you don't get better by being complacent. You get better by someone pushing you and making you play your best every single snap, because that's what is going to happen. You also get a good idea of where your strengths and weaknesses really are, because I know this is kind of something we talked about where, you know, Zach Allen, and I think Zach Allen had a better game, but Zach Allen, after the first preseason game, there was some talk about, oh, well, he was showing out in camp, but it might have been because the line he was going against is garbage, right? Which unfortunately looked like there was some visual proof to that. But then you go and you get to practice against the Rams. And I'm not saying that they have the best offensive line in the league, but it's just it's different. They play differently. They're different guys. He's not used to them. It gives him more of an opportunity to, and I'm using one specific player, but this works for all of them, gives him an opportunity to try his pass rush moves against someone else and maybe even against a different defensive philosophy and different coaching. And I just think it's a fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, Matty, do you have a thought on the joint practices?
I think perspectives matter. Getting new experiences matter. Being a military guy, like, obviously, you know, Broncos and Rams practicing together, you don't really care about relations between Los Angeles and Denver, right? Like, this ain't that type of thing. But for the personnel involved, right? Like, if you do joint exercises with another country and you're working, you know, together, you see how they do things. You see what their processes are. You see what their equipment is. You get to like, oh, dang, I never even considered doing it that way because we've always done it this way.
Exactly.
Oh, and that guy is sure as hell not going to beat me out, you know, in whatever this competition is. I'm not trying to throw hands like with Canada or with Great Britain or anything like that. Like, nah, but like, I'm also going to show out. Like, maybe I wear, you know, if I was, you know, repping the Broncos and that, I'd be wearing this with a little more pride than I would when I'm, you know, hitting somebody wearing my same colors. So like a lot of that stuff matters, and it's good to just shake things up, and it gets you an opportunity to coach guys in situations that you couldn't necessarily create organically on your own. Fighting is good to an extent. Now, throwing helmets around isn't great. But when you got guys, I mean, you coalesce around that, right? It could bring some unity. So if you got two starters going at it, I love what Prime said. You know, this is a Colorado thing. Like, if one of your starters is fighting, everybody else better be up off your butt and being like defending him and like going to his aid, because that creates a unity and a fighting spirit within a team. It's now an us versus them instead of, oh, well, that dude over there is like, he just took my spot.
Did you guys hear about what Jason Kelce did along those same lines?
No, what
Jason Kelce like started a brawl defending a teammate. So like, you love to see it. Go ahead. Yeah,
what I was gonna say, like, I like the fact that you do see fights in camp. It's just more about like the extensiveness of the fight that you never want to see. Like, you know, like an actual brawl, you know, unfold, like the unfortunate thing that happened with like Aaron Donald, you know, swinging a helmet. Like you just don't want to, you just do not want to see that. Like, you know, that's like the Myles Garrett and what is it, Mason Rudolph situation that actually happened in a game. Like you just don't want to see those types of things happen. Which, by the way, that brings me to when Kevin Stefanski said today that if you're ever in a fight at joint practices, that you'll actually play in preseason, which is an interesting take on the fighting in the joint practices. So moving on to the game itself of the third and final preseason, which still feels weird to say, by the way, that there's still like not 4 preseason games. We're now at like the final one, which is 3. Would it actually surprise us if they even rolled the starters out? Because like Sean Payton has been such a mystery at times. Like Russell Wilson was supposed to play roughly around those 20 to 25 snaps, but he looked so good. He pulled him after one drive.
I lost a bet because of that.
So I mean, would we be surprised if the starters kind of rolled out there for another drive or say 2 drives or something in that final preseason game, knowing the fact that he's even let the starters play a little bit longer than usual?
I definitely think we'll see them. I have no idea how long. It might be another 1 drive thing. But I do think we're going to see the starters play, or at least offensive starters.
But what offensive starters?
Probably.
I think it'll be a player by player basis, but I think we pretty much see everybody. I think he'll use it as a warm up, like a quote unquote warm up game. I think there's the chance he does something where he's like, I'm going to have the starters play the whole half. Like you could completely Andy Reid it. So I'm not going to be surprised no matter what he does at this point.
So what are some of the takeaways, Matty and Frankie and Brandon? What are some of the things that you want to take away from this, from the position battles? Like, are you wanting, say, the tight end 4? Like, if the Broncos choose to carry 4 tight ends, you want to see something like a tight end 4, like the Alberto Cuevanam, the Nate Atkins love, which we didn't say his name yet, but I mean, like Nate Atkins deserves some love and possibly, is pushing for the 53-man roster. Are we going to see a lot of McLaughlin? I know we talked a little bit about McLaughlin, obviously, a lot earlier, but I think it would be a telling point if you didn't see a lot of McLaughlin or you only saw him for like a drive or 2. That's a telltale sign that he's probably making it on that 53-man roster. What are some of those some other takeaways, like draft class takeaways, like seeing a fair amount of the draft class in the preseason? What are some of those takeaways or things that you want to see?
I want to see more from the wide receiver depth. Like I want to see Brandon Johnson. I want to see Taylor Grimes.
Will he play though? Will Brandon Johnson play?
I don't know. Well, if he can, but like I just want to see those guys get some game snaps and like show what they can do and get an opportunity to. I mean, obviously they're already going to get the opportunity to like prove that they should make the roster, but just with the injuries happening in that room, like let me rephrase. I want to see them succeed. I want to see them go out there and do good things because we need them to.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been curious with like the injuries to the wide receiver room, if there's the possibility. I mean, like Sean Payton's always been a guy that kind of keeps extra running backs or keeps extra tight ends, honestly. So I think there's the possibility we see maybe a lighter wide receiver room than we're expecting, maybe just 5 guys kept. And then maybe we see both Tyler Beatty and McLaughlin kept. Maybe like Alberto had a really good week last week, both in special teams, run blocking. He didn't catch the ball, which is kind of weird for him, but he actually looked the part of like an NFL tight end last week against some third stringers, albeit, but I'd be interested to see if he can kind of have a rejuvenation and kind of maybe they end up keeping 5 bodies in the tight end room. Like, I think they could kind of do some weird things with the kind of personnel they end up wanting to keep, because I mean, we've said it the whole time. Like, this team wants to run the ball. This team is going to be top 5 in carries by the end of the year. Like, I don't even think you have to like really be like, oh man, that's a bold take. Like, no, that's just kind of like, I expect this team to be top 5 in carries by the end of the year. Sean Payton has always given all of his backfield a ton of carries. I don't expect that to change this year. They're going to be playing a lot of 12, 13, 21, 22. And Nate Adkins is basically the backup fullback to Burton. Like, I haven't seen Adkins run the ball yet, but like, there's probably a world where they're being like, man, we could probably have Nate Adkins just be our fullback this year, and we don't
like an Andrew Beck situation.
He's like, I mean, he's already been playing as their fullback, leading the way. He was leading the way for a lot of the Jaleel McLaughlin runs, and like he looks very good at it. So it's like, I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch out for. One thing that's been kind of an interesting flip is like, I went into the preseason talking about how concerned I was about the offensive line depth. I think everybody was concerned about the offensive line depth. Heck, I'm still a little bit concerned. But like, I don't know how many people watch other teams' preseasons or like watch other teams' games.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, offensive lines around the league are awful, like so bad. Like Denver's backup offensive line's really not that bad in comparison. Like, they probably have a middle of the pack, damn near like maybe like 10th, 11th, 12th backup offensive line in the league. And like, that's not even me trying to like shoot up smoke up their butts. There are some really bad units of offensive lines.
Almost no one has a great offensive
there are some offensive lines that have really bad starting units, but like, you know, I've been really impressed with what we've seen out of Isaiah Prince this year. Who's the other guy?
I want to see more from Alex Pilchak. Don't you fucking dare. Damn it, I hate you.
He's great.
I was about to say it. That was my other guy I want to watch. Is
Quinn
Alex.
I
can't pronounce his last name.
Who else was it? Will Sherman's just been an effective like run game mauler. And I mean, that's the thing is like they're going to be playing so much more of this gap scheme where I think they can kind of find bodies that they can kind of make work because like they just need massive humans that can somewhat move a little bit. And like they found some of those guys. And like, again, I'm like looking at it now and it's just funny to say where I'm like, I don't really have many concerns about the backup offensive line now. Luke Wattenberg looks like a fine backup left guard. If I'm being completely honest, he was pretty good last week. Forsythe's been decent. If he doesn't work out, they've got Kyle Fuller, who's been serviceable. Like he's not bad. Yeah. Cam Fleming, I think we all agree, is like a fine swing tackle. Like they're a fine unit. Where like that's been a funny flip to me to at least like some of the things where I think I was most concerned about, I'm not that concerned about anymore. And then again, wide receiver, I think is a good example where we were all not concerned. Heck, me and Joey did an episode like literally right before, as terrible as this is, right before the Tim injury happened, where we were like, man, could we see one of these receivers get moved early in the season if like Marvin Mims starts to come online? Instantly, it was like, heck no, buddy. Like we're losing 3 bodies right off the bat. You better find some people. So I don't know. And then, I mean, there's a ton of defensive things to watch too, but I mean, like the defense has just been so weird because I can't like, they've already talked about how much they're not showing a lot of the packages they're going to be running, especially when you talk about guys like Drew Sanders. So like, again, last week, a lot of people were freaking out about all the things that were happening with like Vance Joseph giving up a last second touchdown. I want to be like, do you guys realize like who's on the field right now? Like,
right, exactly.
Like there are like, we're having corners play just like quarters. Like we're playing pretty soft shell. Like we have no one who can create a pass rush. We're just playing off.
3rd and 4th stringers.
Yeah, man.
Wait, we're not playing cover 0 right off the bat.
Right. Like we're not in their chest at all. Like, yeah, man, Trey Lance is going to complete some dig routes to these guys because we have Art Green covering him. And
Trey Lance thrown against real estate agents.
Right. Random side note, Ronnie Bell had a pretty impressive game. I liked what I saw to him.
Yeah.
But,
except for when he was covered by Damari Mathis.
That's true.
Bell's a player.
Yeah.
Bell's certainly a player. He's got a spot.
He makes so much sense in the Kyle Shanahan world. Like he makes so much sense. He's like a Debo Light.
And right, perfect. His run after the catch is really a problem. That can be a weapon for them moving forward. The thing I'm curious about, and he might have competition, I don't know. 4 for 4. What does that mean to y'all? 2 field goals made on right. Oh, 2 field goals made on 2 attempts. 2 extra points made on 2 attempts. Got to see it. I need consistency. I need it in 2 consecutive games. I still don't feel confident in him being the answer moving forward. I wish that Fry didn't get hurt because I think Fry might have had a chance to win that job. I'm
appreciate you, Clayton.
We're gonna have opportunities. We're gonna have opportunities to kick, and this one's at home. Yeah, Rams are at Denver. So we're going to be able to kick in the altitude and all of that, which is going to be important because we need to see how the ball moves and all of that. It's definitely put up or shut up. If he throws a dud and he's like 1 for 2, 1 for 3 on attempts, from the field and has a missed extra point or a couple of close ones, like he could be in danger. I don't want him resting on his laurels like he's got the job already.
Yeah. And I was going to say with Maher, I think the one thing that like, I've said it numerous times, but like, I feel like if you were to cross sports, the best comparison you could ever come up with is a kicker's like a closer in baseball. You have to have the memory of a goldfish and you have to be able to have that short-term memory. And I think that like, if you look at it from the standpoint, obviously, and I said it before, it's like, you never want people to lose their jobs, but I think from a kicker benefit, it also could benefit you mentally to prepare and actually know the fact that maybe I actually am the guy. And so them releasing Elliott Fry, obviously with an injury designation, maybe mentally that has got into Mars' head. Like maybe they actually believe that I'm the guy. And so I'm going to go out and actually prove that I am the guy. Now that I am the only guy in that room.
Yeah, I had one note about Mayer just because I gotta stand on my pedestal a little bit because I was pretty not happy about this. So after the Arizona game, obviously everyone was very upset at Mayer, rightfully so. But one thing I kind of that I took note of is everyone obviously knows how crappy the field was in that situation, and I don't think a lot of people, I went back. I'm a sicko. Everyone who follows me knows I watch a lot of film. I went back and watched the holds because I was like, man, because for people that don't remember the specific preseason game, because who cares about the preseason game against the Cardinals? He wasn't the only kicker that missed. Elliott Fry missed a kick. Matt Prater on the Cardinals missed a kick. People were missing kicks left and right. And I was kind of like, man, you're kicking from right. For anyone who watched the game, there was just a strip down the middle of just this dried, rugged terrain that looked like just like a battlefield that I'm sure plopping the ball in that thing, you might have been going in a divot or something. So I was kind of I don't want to say throwing that game away, but part of me was like, man, let me see him another week, because it was weird to me. Again, we watched Prater miss a 53-yarder, which don't get me wrong, that's not a gimme, but it's Matt Prater. We watched Fry miss a 39-yarder, and I was like, man, if it was just him missing and these other kickers, if it was just one other kicker, I'd be like, okay. But it was every other kicker in the game had issues. So I was really glad to see him go 4 for 4. And I'm while yes, I'm concerned about Mayer, and as soon as the whatever they're called come back, and I'm going to look like a fool. But I was excited to see him bounce back, and I think people kind of held that game against him because, again, I think it's so funny to me. People were willing to use the field as an excuse, I think, for every other situation except for the player that's literally he's kicking the ball off of the field. If the field sucks, he's gonna it can be a real issue. And as someone who in warm-ups of my JV football games would be holding for the kicker because I wasn't playing in that game, I know a lot about holding football. And let me tell you, if there's divots, your kicker's gonna be pissed. He might kick you in the thumb and you won't be happy. So yeah, that was my only note, is that I think too many people
Broncos, you guys should sign Frankie
a little bit to the Cardinals. Do not sign me. Oh, I would get panicked. Oh my God.
Yeah, we don't want to. I was gonna say we don't want a little giant situation.
I'd make the kicker miss because I would yelp as God knows who's running at me, a safety is trying to sprint to me off. And then the kicker just whiffs with his leg. He just can't even get close to the ball. He's you scared me. I'm I'm sorry. I got scared. I don't know what to tell you.
I was gonna say I don't want a little giant situation, where instead of actually kicking the football, he actually kicks you in the nuts.
Annexation of Puerto Rico. Let's run it.
Right. One of the best plays ever, the annexation of Puerto Rico. All right, gents. That actually brings us to the main topic of the show. Randy Gradishar is one step closer. Now, obviously, he was named a finalist, a senior finalist, one of 3. But we all know that roughly when you are, we should say when you are named a finalist, a senior finalist, and you're along with 3, that it's about a formality that you will be in the Hall of Fame. So there is about I would say a 95 or more chance that he's going to the Hall of Fame. And there's really only one case where a player has never gone to the Hall of Fame when been voted as a senior finalist. And, that was a guy, I want to say was Humphrey back in 2009. So it's been done before, but we're on a string now. That just seems like he's finally getting the recognition that he deserves. And gents, he's the first. Can you believe it? He's the first member over 40 plus years. He's the first and only member right now of the Orange Crush defense. So Randy Gradishar,
that's a crime.
It appears is headed to Canton.
I wish I was wearing a Randy Gradishar jersey right now, but unfortunately, I do not own one. It's about damn time.
Yeah, and
I second that.
Knock on wood, because technically he's not in. But I will.
I
will go down there and raise some hell. I will tear shit up if he doesn't get in.
You hear that, Canton? Brandon will
I'm
be
coming
there
for you.
So for you kids that weren't around when he played, and I am also one of them, which is kind of nice to say as a 38-year-old man. He came in the NFL in 1974. Last season was 1983, all with the Broncos. 7 Pro Bowls, 2 All-Pro nods. The guy was one of the best players at the linebacker position in his era over a decade. So, or right at a decade. So it's well deserved for him to have gotten to this point. He deserves to get his bust. He deserves to go into the Hall of Fame. And hopefully it's one of many to come. Elway getting in kind of greased the skids for some other players during that era. Hopefully we can get some other guys some steam as we move forward. So well deserved, Randy Gradishar. You know what? Like, it's been a long time coming. It's been celebrating him getting passed over and being mad at voters for not knowing ball. Finally, they've done some research, so good on him.
So I was asking the guys that do the 5280 podcast, and obviously the new show, which is now over on the PSF app. So make sure you guys download that. We're working some technical issues to try and get it on Android, and we'll get that fixed. But download that on the App Store and go listen to the Elevation Orange show. But we were talking about it on Elevation Orange, and I actually posed the question. I said, with Gradishar in, I asked Glenn, Baldman, Doc Hauser, and Mike Mundungus this question. But I said that with Gradishar going in, and with the Broncos' new ownership group, and this is the question for you guys and people that are in the chat, do you guys actually think that maybe with Gradishar in, that a blend between Gradishar and the owners, that we actually see more of a power move from Gradishar and them to get more players that are from the Broncos in the Hall of Fame? Obviously members from the Orange Crush defense, guys like Louis Wright, maybe more recognition for guys like Carl Mecklenburg as another one of those players that is deserving to go into the Hall of Fame. Maybe we work on some sort of media agreement, right? Because media is such a big deal possibly about getting some of these players into the Hall of Fame, a la Terrell Davis, to name one, because I think that him being with NFL Network helps some with him getting into the Hall of Fame. Kurt Warner was another one. Bill Cowher was certainly another one. Maybe working a media agreement with Omaha Productions, possibly, as far as getting something worked. Could you guys see a potential power move from the Waltons in that regard?
Maybe. I'll be honest. I don't care about the Hall of Fame is so stupid at this point. I feel like they're so classically so bad. They leave off so many people and let in so many people. Every year we're talking about the numerous things
rigged
that they leave off. Like, right, where it's just kind of like, sorry, not to give like a cheating answer, but it's just like, it's so funny because like it's sad almost that they have any of you guys been to the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
I've always wanted to, but no, haven't.
Pretty cool. I did go. It was one of the few field trips I've met. I live in the Midwest, so there's not much to see. So that's one of the few things I've gone to visit. But like Pro Football Hall of Fame is cool, and it's too bad that like, I don't know, like it feels like it's just kind of this tainted thing at this point. It feels like as it's aged, it's just gotten so much worse with the social media age, with so much of, like you guys said, the media corruption of it all. It just kind of sucks. So like, it's too much. It's too bad to say that like yes, hopefully I hope more Broncos get inducted, but at the same time, it's kind of like, who cares? Like not who cares, but just like who. It doesn't impact my memory of those players. And I think that's the more important thing, that just like, as much as it sucks, like,
no, but just for that,
I guess it does
for their legacy, because people forget players all the time. Like if you're not a fan of the team, but if that person's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, that's what it is. They earned, I can't remember the exact stat. I'll have to go back and look it up. I think it's something about like, there's only 9 players that have 10,000 tackles or something in their career. Randy Gradishar is one of them, and he's the only one that's not in the Hall of Fame.
Will be, right. But I mean, at this point,
he will be. But like that's kind of what I mean. It's more just like them cementing their legacy.
No, and on that note, like obviously,
literally
like,
cement.
And I guess like that's just such.
I get what you're. I mean, I understand what you're saying.
It's just what kind of disregards it in general, where it's just kind of like, man, like how are so many guys like this? Because he's not even the most blatant example, but there's so many examples like him that are just like, year after year, these guys get passed over. We all know the reason why. That is like it just slowly taints the award more and more.
Because it's a popularity contest. If you're not the Cowboys or the Steelers, good luck.
So people that are commenting in the chat, and Frankie and Brandon and Matty, I'll pose this question to all of us, and that is, who should the next Bronco be that goes into the Hall of Fame? And that includes anything from Mike Shanahan, who might be the obvious choice, and also was pushed aside, as we were talking about some potential Hall of Fame, bias, a little bit earlier. But who should the next Bronco representation be in the Hall of Fame?
I'm gonna steal Shanny.
Shanny for sure.
Set the benchmark for a lot of what the offensive game is still in the NFL today. Him not being in is still just such a joke. So I'm gonna cheat and steal that one, and I'll go Shanny.
You being an all 22 nut, I that doesn't surprise me.
Right. No, it's so crazy. You don't have many coaches that, Zach Seegers makes this point all the time, fellow LTB guy, where when you have a coach that has the success record he has and had the impact on the game that he has, it's so simple. You have so many guys that only have one or the other. And he's such an obvious case where huge impact on the game, massive success in his resume, put him in there.
Yeah. So one of the guys, and he's actually already part of this nominated class, but Alex Gibbs, who is kind of the father of, if you guys haven't heard this, I'm kind of surprised, or I'll be surprised if you know this, but he's basically the father of the zone blocking scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And he helped Terrell Davis get his 2,000-yard season and MVP award, and then later was an amazing coach. So I think he should absolutely be in. He's already been nominated, so he might be in, but he's kind of maybe a less obvious one, because Shanahan, pretty obvious. Another guy who's kind of up there is Dan Reeves.
It's definitely not even the sexy one, because it doesn't
be obvious. What's that?
It's not even a sexy one because it doesn't really rattle off the tongue, because you really don't think about it. And Ray even
Alex
mentioned,
Gibbs,
that it's a good one.
Yeah, no, Alex Gibbs for sure. He should honestly already be in.
What about you, Matty?
There are two guys I'd like to highlight. One was responsible for a big-time touchdown that the Broncos scored in that Super Bowl run on primetime football. I'm talking about Jamal Charles. That guy still to this day, highest average per carry. I want to say 2 All-Pro nods, 4 Pro Bowls. He was a stud in his own right. But the guy I would realistically like to talk about, Brandon Marshall, for many different reasons. The only player in NFL history to record 1,000 yards receiving for 4 different teams. Also caught 21 balls in one game, wearing our colors.
That's right.
And he was a stud. One-time All-Pro. I want to say 5 Pro Bowls that he was mentioned to. So you start getting into 5 Pro Bowls, over a lot of guys, play for around 10 years. That's dominance in the NFL for, half of your career. And what he's started to do off the field also, I think, carries weight, and how much he's highlighted about mental health within the game, the advancements that he has made for the sport in that capacity, and with his social media. I think all of that culminates to be somebody. Obviously, I don't think he's a first ballot type of inductee, but as he's getting that next couple of looks, I think that he's somebody that's going to draw strong consideration.
Yeah.
Also, ironically, because I forgot to mention this about Alex Gibbs, he was also on the Seattle Seahawks staff when it was the first year under Pete Carroll. Ironically, I find that interesting. Anyway, go ahead.
So yeah, I think I was a little bit surprised you guys didn't get a chance to say his name. Obviously, I know that Frankie went with the obvious choice, which was Mike Shannon, and the other obvious choice, of course, is Rod Smith. Rod Smith being the other one that is deserving, of course, of the Hall of Fame. Obviously, people know by now Rod Smith is not my favorite wide receiver in Broncos history. That is number 88, the late Demaryius Thomas. But I do think that both are very deserving of the Hall of Fame, and I think that Rod Smith is absolutely deserving. He is the team leader in receiving yards. I mean, in nearly every single receiving category, Rod Smith is a Bronco legend. He is the greatest, maybe the greatest undrafted player of all time. I think it's just going to be a very interesting case, as far as, how are they going to be able to promote him and make it seem like he is a very worthwhile case. He does have a case, but is the Hall of Fame committee going to listen, right? And so Rod Smith is one that I definitely would love to see in the Hall of Fame. And that's another one of those cases where maybe that's the next shoe that gets in from the player perspective in terms of, Randy Gradishar and then now Rod Smith and so on and so forth. But and talking about Brandon Marshall is like a Hall of Fame type podcast. He has a great podcast that's out there, by the way, with the I Am Athlete. And so it's a great podcast. If you guys actually get a chance to check that out, it's a very raw podcast, and it's actually one where they actually had Marshawn Lynch on, and he did not butcher Russell Wilson at all. So it was a fun little episode, and of course a fun little podcast. So yeah, it's a fun conversation, and certainly one that I'm kind of curious, how it all unfolds out. Ray says Nalen. So he says, if not Mike Shannon, it says Tom Nalen. Appreciating some of those people from the offensive line.
Tom Nalen's a good one.
Yeah, definitely another really good one. So yeah, any other parting thoughts? We close the show. Any words of wisdom? Anything you guys just didn't get a chance to touch on that you guys want to, let out?
Let me just repeat my threat, Canton. I'm watching.
You're watching?
I'm watching you. If you don't put him in,
we're watching you.
I will find
you. That's right. Just
I have a very particular set of skills.
Go team, no injuries, please, for the love of God, especially at the wide receiver court. Like, enough's enough. I'm over it. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Manely Broncos podcast. Frankie, it's always a blast having you on, man. You and the crew do such an incredible job with Let's Talk Broncos. You guys are starting a fantastic series now with Perna, on Wednesdays now, which is so fun. You're doing your Gold Stars segment. So, I guess before we go, what was your idea in terms of that? Like to kind of like start a new series like that? Was that something like was just fresh in your mind and just kind of came up, at a random one night and you're like, oh, I'll just do
needed something to do. I wasn't really writing articles this year, so just needed something. I don't know. Thought it would be an entertaining thing for everybody to get to watch. So I just kind of hoped everybody would enjoy it. And I've been just kind of like, I don't know. I've been trying to just get better at my editing and explaining film games, just kind of good reps for that stuff. So I don't know. I just thought it would be something other people would enjoy and kind of something I do kind of anyways. Like, I don't know, just kind of a good way for me to kind of collect my thoughts and something to look back on. So that was pretty much that.
Well, you are an absolute superstar, my friend. Go follow him. He's at Frankie's Film. You and Joey, Robbie, and Zach are also some of the best in the business. It's in breaking down. And Brew, of course, and as far as like the All-22, the whole team with Let's Talk Broncos is fantastic. So make sure you go follow them. They are the Notre Dame of podcasts in Broncos country right now. They are independent. Okay. So that's my overall comparison for them. But again, thank you. But anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast, watching this podcast. We will see you guys next time with another episode of the Manely Broncos podcast, and make sure that you guys tune into some more episodes that'll be showing up on the MHRT network from multiple different shows on the network. So make sure you guys keep your eyes peeled for multiple shows on this network. So thank you guys again, and go Broncos.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 go.